What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas. Thanks so much for being with me. I really appreciate everybody who's been sticking with the show. We had a couple weeks without a show. It's rare for us to go that long without putting one out, but every once in a while we'll get these bumps in the road where it'll just be hard for me to get guests at a certain time because people I've attempted to get a hold of are busy, and then when other guests are available, I'm busy, and I just had another death in the family, so I was out of town. I was in Long Island for a funeral and wake, so that kind of messed up my schedule a little bit, and it's been kind of hectic. So, but I'm back, and we have another episode with another great guest. John Gold is our guest today, and he has a podcast called We Were Lied To About 9/11, which, with the title, you could probably guess what the podcast is about, but he's had plenty of awesome guests. He had Lori, who's one of the Jersey Girls that some of you guys might know from 9/11 Press for Truth, which is a great documentary we talk about on this podcast. And it's one that I just found out that John actually helped fund. He actually helped get some money to help finish the film because he understood how important this film was. And it really is. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. I'm sure, almost positive you can find it on YouTube, but it's also, actually, I'm pretty sure it's in my playlist of documentaries on the Ripple Effects Podcast YouTube channel. So if you just look up the Ripple Effect Podcast and that YouTube channel, RV36, you can find the documentary there. But if you want to support them, you can also purchase the DVD or film or get it on iTunes, wherever you want to get it. And the money goes to supporting the filmmakers. And, you know, it's always awesome to support projects and people you are a fan of, because it guarantees that they'll continue doing what they're doing and giving us the products and work that we love. But he had people on his podcast like Robbie Martin, Abby Martin, Cindy Sheehan, Colleen Rowley, Ray McGovern, who's been on my show, Thomas Drake, just tons of great guests. And obviously it's all about 9/11. So if you're intrigued with the topic, you're intrigued with the story and those events and all these people's individual stories and their link to 9/11 and the research that they've done, definitely check out his podcast. He also wrote a book called 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. So we talk about his podcast, we talk about his book, and his book's available on Amazon. So check that out. And I think that's it for now. Also, 5 episodes from... Oh, the other thing I was going to tell you guys. Early in the episode, for some reason, I was having issues with Pro Tools, and so the audio's kind of messed up a little bit, or not as good as quality, and then probably 15 minutes in, the quality gets a little better. You might not even notice it, but if you do, that's what it is, and then the rest of the episode is fine. Also, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like I mentioned. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever method you use to listen to us, and remember that our YouTube channel also has my Theory 6 music project. And you can also find Theory 6 music anywhere you can find digital downloads, and getting Theory 6 music is a great way to help the podcast. All that money goes directly to helping the show. And also rate our show on iTunes, Stitcher, however you listen to the show. That little act of rating goes a long way with just people running into our podcast and people searching or browsing through podcasts. It's more likely that they'll run into the Ripple Effect Podcast if we have a lot of ratings and stuff like that, so, and a lot of reviews. So if you could do that, it'd be very much appreciated. And also we have, I swear this is the last time I'm going to say, and also we also have the 100th episode coming up. I haven't found enough time to really look into and figure out and be confident about how to stream a live podcast on YouTube, but that's the goal. On our 100th episode, I'm hoping to get Dave on the show, my co-host, who's actually hasn't done a show in a while, but if you've been listening to the show for a while, you're familiar with him, and hopefully have him on and then do a live show, stream it live, and have people Skype in, tweet us, Facebook us, whatever, however you want to contact us, and me and him will do the typical Ricky and Dave just bullshitting about whatever, and talking about our lives and just whatever topics come to mind. And then as people write us or call us or whatever, then we'll expand on those topics and go from there. So should be fun. That's the goal at the moment. Like I said, I haven't figured it out yet. I'm not super tech savvy, but I think it should be easy enough to figure out. I think I need some software or something like that, but hopefully I figure it out before episode 100, and that's the game plan, and I can stick to doing that. So it should be fun to actually connect with some guests and see what they're saying, and see who's listening, who would listen to live. And maybe if we get a lot of people listening, maybe we'll continue doing some episodes every once in a while, some live streaming. So I think that's it for now. Enjoy the show, guys, and hopefully I have another show out very soon. I apologize again, like I said, for the big break between this one and the last episode, but as you guys know, it's kind of rare. Sometimes I end up putting 2 episodes out in a day or a week, and some podcasters will release 1 episode a week, and then that way, if they do record 2 in 1 week or 3 in 1 week, then they can save them for those weeks they don't have guests. But I just like to get them out as soon as possible. So because of that, sometimes stuff like this happens, and it kind of messes up people who are looking forward to a show every week or every 2 weeks. But anyways, enough of me talking. Enjoy the show, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Hey, Ricky, how are you doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
I've ran into your work plenty of times just from having great guests on and just tons of intriguing podcasts. And I love the fact that you keep on bringing up this conversation about 9/11. I feel like a lot of people who were initially very, I guess, influenced to do something or provoked to do something, I think some people have lost that spark a little bit. And but similar like yourself, I think it's a very important topic, and I think we still haven't had anybody accountable for to cover up, for a lack of better term. And I think it's one of those things where so many things came afterwards with unjustified wars and all these things, that it's still such an important issue and topic and event, similar to like the JFK assassination and stuff like that. I really do feel like it's our generation's version of the JFK assassination. It's going to be one of those events that are going to be talked about for centuries. And unfortunately, I probably feel like it's going to be one of those events that, similar to the JFK assassination, there's still a lot of debate on what happened and who let it happen and stuff like that. But before I go on a rant, thanks for being with me. And how, for the listeners who might not be familiar with you, how did you get involved in this? I mean, you're an activist. I mean, you're very passionate about the topic of the September 11th attacks. So how did it all happen? How did you get motivated, and how did you go from just a regular civilian to activist and really trying to spark these conversations?
Well, prior to 9/11, I wasn't politically active at all. I didn't care what our government did. I didn't vote. I didn't do any of those things. After 9/11, I was scared, like most other Americans, and I glued myself to the TV. And I started, paying attention to what the news was saying. And in January of 2002, Bush and Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office and asked him, according to CNN, they said to limit the scope of the congressional investigations, but they asked him, according to Tom Daschle, not to investigate the attacks at all. So my question was, why would the president and vice president, of all people, not want to know exactly how and why this happened so as to make sure it could never happen again? So at that point, I was starting to pay a little bit more attention to the news concerning 9/11. And I don't know if you remember, but after 9/11, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings of any kind, that no one had any idea that this was going to happen, that this was a complete surprise attack like Pearl Harbor. And then in May of 2002, something was leaked called the August 6th Presidential Daily Briefing, which was entitled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S. And it talked about warnings. It talked about hijackings or other types of attacks. It talked about how there were 70 FBI investigations going on within the United States having to do with Al Qaeda or Osama bin Laden related, incidents. It talked about people taking photographs of buildings in New York and stuff like that. So once I found out that we were being lied to, that there was a warning, I was off to the races. And I want to address some of the things you said in your opening comments. You talked about so much other stuff that's happened since 9/11. And the majority of that stuff has taken place in what's called the post 9/11 world. And, it's all essentially a direct result of the actions that we took after 9/11, as a result of 9/11. So, you brought up how I'm constantly on this issue, and I essentially drew a line in the sand with 9/11. I said, these people are not going to get away with the murder of 2,976 people. It's just not going to happen. And again, it's still such an important, pivotal issue of today. And 15 years later, the sad thing is a lot of people see the post 9/11 world as the norm. Like, kids are growing up in this world thinking this is how it is. And it wasn't like this. I mean, it was to a certain extent. Before 9/11, we were not innocent by any stretch of the imagination. But since 9/11, things have just gotten so progressively worse. And you talked about how people have lost the spark. One of the reasons for that is that the corporate news has made it so that anyone who questions 9/11 is the equivalent of a baby killer or a dog torturer. And so a lot of people don't want to be looked at in that light. And I don't blame them. I coined the phrase 9/11 truther, but now I refer to myself as an advocate for 9/11 justice, simply because of the fact that the phrase 9/11 truther has been so tarnished over the years. Another reason, there was so much infighting within the 9/11 truth movement that people just gave up and moved on to other things.
And I think it's counterproductive, because I think that a lot of times people end up arguing, and I heard you talk to Robbie Martin about this, I believe, and I've seen it with him too. He's been on my show a few times, and he gets backlash from some 9/11 advocates or truthers who end up getting mad at him because he doesn't agree with the same maybe theories on what the alternative, and there's so many alternative theories. Like, I think what we should really focus on is that we all agree that something could have been done, something wasn't done. They did an awful job investigating it. It was, similar to the Warren Commission. It was a joke of an investigation that didn't really accomplish anything. And those are things we should all come to terms with, and we should all, in other words, I feel like we're all fighting the same fight. We might all have different, or some of us might have different points of views on what exactly happened or what did or didn't happen, but we all agree that, they had foreknowledge of it. That's quite obvious. They obviously covered up whatever did happen, and they used it to justify going into wars and killing more people after we already had the travesty that 9/11 was, and we already had so much bloodshed on that day. And then we go around justifying killing more people, and the wars afterwards, even more people have died since 9/11, in those wars than people who died on 9/11. So, I mean, I think those are the things that everybody should kind of come together with, and really realize that we're all on the same team. And I think a lot of times people end up fighting over, did this happen? And I don't agree with everybody who comes on my show and on the specifics maybe, but that's okay. Like, to me, that's not, it really isn't that important if we agree on, certain specifics on, oh, what do you think happened with Building 7, or what do you think hit the Pentagon, or whatever. To me, it's like, well, we can all, if we're all sparking these conversations and we're all trying to do it for the purpose of trying to get some justice, then I think that's a good thing. And so what's your opinion on, my little rant?
Well, I think that, one of the things that people need to do is accept the fact that they don't know what happened on 9/11. I've researched this for 14 years now. There are 5 or 10 people on the planet that know more than anybody else about 9/11. I would be one of those people. I'm not saying that for my ego. I'm just saying that's what happens as a result of researching for 14 years. But I still don't know what happened on 9/11. I don't know who was ultimately responsible. I certainly can point towards suspects for the crime of 9/11, but without a real criminal investigation with subpoena power, with the ability to call people under oath, to testify with the idea that they'll be held accountable if they lie during their testimony, I mean, it's kind of hard to get to the exact truth. We know about lies, we know about omissions, we know about contradictions in what people said. We know how corrupt and compromised all of the investigations were, especially the 9/11 Commission, which is a slap in the face to the families of 9/11, in my eyes.
Well, it took the families to even have that investigation. I mean, they're the ones who pushed that investigation to happen. So
Think about the fact that we would not have had that investigation if not for the families. How scary is that?
yeah, that's insane.
You know?
It's just that's the thing. There's so much to that, and I mean, and I've heard you on Opie and Anthony, and obviously those guys are pretty silly, and they talk about and I've heard them bash. I think it was one of the producers, Corey of Loose Change, and they had a little debate with him, and they're like, oh, you guys have an agenda because you guys are already anti-government, this and that, but it's like, you guys have an agenda of already. I mean, you can't ignore the things that we know. We can all debate the things we don't know, but like you said, the things that we know for a fact that, if it wasn't for the families, the Jersey women, which Press for Truth is an awesome documentary, because people who want to watch something that has nothing to do with conspiracy theories, but really gets into what had to be done to force an investigation, and then all the corruption and for a lack of a better term, fuckery that happened with the investigation, with the president and vice president being in the same room and not testifying under oath, and all these other things that just like, it's obvious something is being covered up. Now, what that cover up is, like you said, nobody can know for sure. And I had Ryan Dawson on my last podcast, and we talked about 9/11 briefly, and he calls Loose Change those guys dumb, and Alex Jones an idiot. And I think it's counterproductive, because even if Loose Change wasn't 100% accurate, what it did do was that it did spark people to do their own research. It did spark this conversation. Alex Jones, yeah, is he a little loony at times? Absolutely. But does he spark these conversations? Yeah, he did spark some of these conversations with some people who like myself, I did end up getting exposed to your work and Ryan's work and James Corbett's work because of Loose Change and some of these other things that kind of sparked my interest in these events, and at least just kind of planted the seed of doubt about the official story. And yeah,
I just want to say, I don't like Alex Jones. I don't think that I think he's a detriment to everything that I've tried to do over the years. But
I tend to agree.
There is such a thing as credibility. As activists, our job is to reach people, and we have to do so credibly. We have to sound credible. We have to put forward information that's easily sourced, and keep it simple. And there are so many people, who come up to, it was the Jews, or it was the Zionists, or controlled demolition, a missile hit the Pentagon, the Flight 93 was shot down, and all these things. And they might be right in some cases. But again, what's the easiest thing to, I'm a person who questions a 9/11. If it sounds crazy to me, then how is it going to sound to somebody on the street who has no open mind whatsoever about 9/11? So to me, it's always been it's not rocket science to figure out what sounds crazy and what doesn't sound crazy. Um, you know,
And I agree, because I think, and I've had this conversation with quite a few people on my show, and I remember I had Lionel. I don't know if you're familiar with Lionel from Lionel Media, but he's on the Alex Jones show sometimes, and he was on my show, and we were kind of debating. I was kind of making the case that you're making, that Alex Jones, and a lot of especially now and more recently, he really does make everybody look like a tinfoil hat crazy person who questions anything, because that's the group that we get grouped in with. And Lionel made the argument, but he did do some good things at the beginning by sparking these conversations, and I think that his work did expose a lot of people to maybe I guess his alternative view on history, or maybe questioning the government. But like you said, I think that what ends up happening is when people like that represent people who don't, I guess, believe the official story, then we have an issue, because a lot of the things he says, like you said, sounds crazy to a person like you or me, and we're pretty open-minded, and we pretty much question things, and we don't just take official stories just for the heck of it. So, like you said, an average person, if you're trying to get them into these topics, or into just possibly questioning the official story, somebody like him will turn them off, and then we all seem crazy. And that's why some of the documentaries, some of the 9/11 documentaries, like 9/11 A New Pearl Harbor, and some of these other ones, who go back in history, and they start with like the Gulf of Tonkin and some of these other events that prove that the government has lied to us about other things. And that's what I try to do. I try to tell people, well, we all agree that the JFK assassination didn't happen the way we've been, the official story told us, that there's a single gunman and all this other stuff. We all agree the Iran-Contras happened. We all agree. So you talk about, and you look at all the coups in Central America, and the coups in Iran and in the 50s. If we spark the conversations with those things, and then we're like, okay, well, we agree that governments do cover things up and do things for purposes that are, for their own incentive, then slowly work our way to 9/11. Then I feel like sometimes it's easier to kind of get somebody to be more open-minded to it, because it seems like I have people quickly just say, oh, that's crazy, the fact that the government would do that or cover it up, that's insane. That's their first reaction. So sometimes I try to kind of ease my way into it and see if we could talk about some historical events, and then it's like, well, if we agree that this happened, then, and I think that's a huge issue, because people will look at these historical events, and they can accept that there's some corruption, and there is some there's some things that happen that weren't in the interest of the American people, but for American corporations or foreign policy. And then we talk about more recent events, and I don't know if it's because of our emotional attachment to the event, because it was still so recent. It seems like it's much harder for them to believe. Do you kind of run into the same issues?
Oh, well, the issue that they would never has always been one of the biggest problems trying to reach people. I want to say one last thing about Alex Jones. Yeah. Alex Jones is part of the conspiracy theory industry. He's a businessman.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's also the go-to person for the corporate media, or has been, to paint us all as no different than he is. So if you need to discredit a movement, there's your man. They did it for the 9/11 Truth Movement, and they used other people as well. They did it for Occupy, I think. I don't remember, but I know that he's been used on several occasions. The Second Amendment. Remember when he was on Piers Morgan?
That was so. Oh my God, that hurt everybody so much, because he's already naturally a lunatic, and he took it up like another level. He like put it to 11 and just went crazy. He like made 0 points. just went and said, I'm like, how? I'm like, this person, unfortunately, when I bring up 9/11, in a conversation with friends at a pub and having a drink, that's what people are going to think of. People are going to relate me to them, and I'm like, this is, how am I ever going to detach myself from this conspiracy theorist person who is trying to sell products now and selling, filters and food and all this stuff because the end of the world is coming.
You do what I just did. You just said that Alex Jones does not speak for me. Alex Jones is part of the conspiracy theory industry. Now, with regards to they would never, you're right. Go back in history, talk about proven conspiracies that have taken place. One thing that I did, and I actually gave a speech in Arizona in February 2007 called They Would Never, and it was based on an article that I had written. And I went through, if I said that if they would not facilitate or participate in the 9/11 attacks, does that mean that they would not steal the 2000 and 2004 elections? Does that mean that they would not use depleted uranium in Iraq, which causes our very own soldiers to get sick? Does that mean that they would not lie about the air and water quality down at Ground Zero, causing 70,000 people to get sick and over 1,000 people to die? I mean, these are the kinds of things that I would bring up and say, ultimately, the one thing that they would never do is the right thing, But my God, I mean, look what they did to the 9/11 first responders. They lied about the air and the water quality. They made it nigh impossible for them to get health care. It took years of fighting to finally get the James Zadroga and 9/11 Health and Compensation Act passed to give them the health care that they needed. And this was the same government that was using them as poster childs for the war on terror. And the same government that lied to them. So the idea that they wouldn't hurt their own people is just, can you honestly say, like, Dick Cheney would never, quote, would never participate in this crime or that crime, if it suited his needs? I can't honestly say that.
Yeah, and never mind, he profited from it, and his wife also worked for Lockheed Martin. She worked for Lockheed Martin. He obviously worked for Halliburton. So they profit off the wars that came afterwards. And I mean, they're just, to me, it seems so obvious that at least if we can't agree on anything, then the one thing we can agree is that there was a cover up. And if you want to believe that it was a cover up because they just did a shitty job and they were just trying to hide that, then I guess that's a step in the right direction. At least we're getting closer to the fact that we're agreeing that there's a cover up. But when you research the cover up, you realize that it was so obviously deliberate. I mean, it just seemed like it's hard because, again, these are things that we don't know. We don't know exactly why.
I like to call for accountability, and accountability is great because it applies to both incompetence and criminality. And usually, let's say you hold someone accountable for supposed incompetence. That person will start to talk and say, well, what do you mean I wasn't doing my job? It was so-and-so that blocked me from doing my job. That's how you find out, what might be the truth, is simply by holding people who needed to be accountable. And instead, after 9/11, we saw people that needed to be held accountable were rewarded and promoted. It was just absurd. I mean, I don't remember exactly what it was, but there were these series of attacks in India, and within days, the person who was in charge of India's security resigned in disgrace, because of what had happened. There was a form of accountability, and that just didn't happen in this country after 9/11.
Yeah, nobody got fired. That's the thing. Like, one thing people have to, even if you believe that people just didn't do their job correctly or people messed up or whatever, then why wasn't anybody fired? Like you said, most of these people got promoted. They got better jobs. Why wasn't anybody fired? Why wasn't there a real investigation? Why wasn't, there are just so many questions. And I just think you can't, again, you don't, nobody knows who exactly was involved. I mean, there's obviously links to the ISI and Pakistani money going towards some of the hijackers and all these other things, which we've had a relationship with them since the Afghan war with the Soviets, and funneling money through them. And so, I mean, there's just so much, there's so many other countries too that were involved that we didn't get involved with, when you look at the post 9/11 wars. And actually, this just reminded me of something you mentioned earlier, which I wanted to touch on, was the people who are growing up today. I have a 13-month-old, and I have another child on the way, and these are things I think about. Like, thank you, and honestly, having kids, I was already very motivated with the podcast and trying to do my part in leaving the world a little better than I received it. But now with children, it's like you really think about that much more, and it's a huge impact. Just the world that they're going to live in, and are they going to have privacy? Are they going to be spied on? Are they going to be sent to wars, that are unjust? And all these things just run through your head, and it only provokes me, or sparks me to want to get involved more and do as much as I can. And it's scary to think that it's unfortunate that, like you said, the post 9/11 world, that's what is normal to them. I had this similar conversation with a friend recently about technology, about how, we grew up where there was still some sense of privacy and this and that, but as every generation, as they grow, what is weird to us, what is kind of scary to us, this idea that Facebook or Google knows where you are at all times and is tagging you there. They have facial recognition, all these things that are scary to us. Younger generations that are raised in this and only know this world, to them it's going to be completely normal. They're going to become immune to those ideas.
Well, in regards to children, years ago, I was afraid there was going to be a draft, and my brother was draft age. And so my motivation, part of it was, to avoid a draft. Then my cousins started to have children, started to have babies, second generation babies. And I'd look at them and they'd say, I really want to make this a better world for them. And, my niece was born, my very first niece was born a year ago. And when I saw her, I mean, the same feelings went all through me, is that I have to make this a better world for her.
At least try.
At least try.
Yeah.
And, with regards to whether or not they're spying on us, I could tell you instances of my own experience that I've had where, I was part of what was called Piece of the Action, PEACE of the Action, which Cindy Sheehan founded. And we were spied on by a group called ITRR, which was subcontracted by the Pennsylvania Department of Homeland Security. We were planning on camping out across from the White House at what was called Camp Out Now, and they spied on us beforehand. They gave them threat assessments, and they were making up all these lies about us, about how we were going to be violent and such. Another incident, I planned on chaining myself to the White House fence. And I made people aware of it online. But when I got to the White House, a Capitol Police officer came up to me and he said, "Are you John Gold?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you still planning on chaining yourself to the White House?" I said, "Yes." The only way they would know that is if either somebody turned me in or they were spying on me. Again, so much is dependent upon 9/11. I mean, okay, are you familiar with the Authorization for Use of Military Force?
Yeah.
AUMF? The same one that was written for 9/11 to go after those people for 9/11 is used as the justification for the assassinations that we saw of Americans. I forget those two people, the two terrorists, supposed terrorists, the person and their son were killed. Drone strikes are justified by that AUMF. The action in Syria was used as the justification for their legal justification to go into Syria.
Well, my understanding is basically a loophole to basically get involved and do have warlike actions without actually declaring war.
Oh, that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
But if the AUMF was written specifically to go after those responsible for the 9/11 atrocities, but it's still being used for so many other things. So, I mean, look, that's one reason 9/11 is important. Another reason 9/11 is important is because there are 2,976 families who need justice, who need to see accountability. I don't know that they'll ever have closure. I've spoken to many family members over the years, and I don't know that they'll have closure, but they certainly want justice. They certainly want to know what the hell happened that day and who was ultimately responsible. And they deserve that. We all do, because we were all attacked that day. We were all attacked that day. It was just horrible for all of us.
Well, you talked about the first responders. If it wasn't for Jon Stewart, they wouldn't even have insurance. It was him, basically pushing to extend their medical care. And that's ridiculous. This idea that people who are basically fucking heroes who went there put their health and lives at stake to try to help strangers, and off the clock. Now, people were saying, oh, well, you weren't technically working for us, so we're not going to pay for your medical bills and, stupid stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy that this has to be debated, that this has to be a conversation. I mean, this should be so cut and dry. I mean, you want to talk about places where we spend money recklessly. I don't think, if politicians were afraid of, they don't ever seem afraid for spending money on wars, without the public's, I guess, backing the wars or backing whatever the hell they're doing. I think everybody can get on board the idea that first responders should get whatever money they need, whatever help they need, no questions asked. And the fact that had to be pushed and that had to be fought for was just, I mean, it pissed me off so much. I mean, it just, again, you put yourself in their position, or you just picture them as like, it's so easy too when you're detached from it, when it's not you, to kind of move on with your life and not think about these things. But I don't know, man. I mean, I see things like that, and it drives me crazy because
that's one thing I want you to try and do, and one thing I want your listeners to try and do, is to put yourself in the shoes of a 9/11 family member, like one of the Jersey Girls, for instance. I always say that I'm familiar with my anger over all of these lies and, cover-ups and so forth, but I can't possibly imagine what it feels like to know what I know, on top of having lost someone that day, to see the names of their loved ones used to do all of these horrible things. So put yourself in the shoes of a 9/11 family member. That's a great motivator for me. Patty Casaza, in November 2007, she gave a surprise visit at a conference. She's one of the Jersey Girls. She gave a surprise visit at a conference, and one of the things that she said is that each time she looks at this information, she dies a little. And so that's one of the things that helps to motivate me, is to do the work for them so that they don't have to, essentially. I mean, they have to do some things, but the majority of the pushing and the activism and so forth, I mean, that's us. We have to help them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy because it has nothing to do with ideologies, nothing to do with politics. I mean, some of these Jersey women, if not all of them, I know, voted for Bush. It wasn't because they were anti-Bush or anything like that.
Two of them did.
What's that?
Two of them voted
two of them did. Yeah. So I mean, they just wanted answers, just like anybody who lost a loved one would. And the fact that they had a fight like that, I mean, that's the thing. Like, people just, it takes very little research to find some inconsistencies with the official story. But unfortunately, if you put in 9/11 in a Google search, you might end up at Infowars.com, which is which is going to turn some people off.
That, my recommendations as an activist, as a researcher, as an author, for sources of information are: number one, the 9/11 Family Steering Committee's website, which has a list of their unanswered questions, which has their testimony before the 9/11 Commission, which has all of their press releases that they released during the time of the 9/11 Commission, including things that called for the resignation of the executive director, Philip Zelikow. I mean, there's so much incriminating information on that site alone, but also historycommons.org, which has the complete 9/11 timeline, which was started by Paul Thompson. I recommend reading the different press releases of the Jersey Girls since the release of the 9/11 Commission. Now, during the time of the 9/11 Commission, before the 9/11 Commission, the Jersey Girls, they were like media darlings. They were on TV a lot. Then after the release of the 9/11 report, when the narrative was set in stone, they became persona non grata. You talked about 9/11 Press for Truth. Not one single news outlet in this country covered that movie. And it's not because they didn't know about it. We had campaigns to send this movie to different news outlets, and instead they chose to focus on Ann Coulter, who at the time was attacking the Jersey Girls. They chose to focus on ABC's documentary called Path to 9/11, which was factually incorrect. And they just completely ignored it. One of the things that happened with 9/11 Press for Truth is that movie critics, a lot of them did not ignore it, and all of them gave it a thumbs up review, 3 out of 4 stars, and all that stuff. Every single one of them. So I don't think anything's come out of the 9/11 Truth Movement that's produced so much positive, just such a positive outcome. But I forget where we were going with this.
That's okay. That's going to happen a lot. But yeah, no, I agree. That's definitely one of the documentaries I usually refer to quite often. That's one that I tell people to watch because it really just focuses on the facts. It focuses on, the commission report, the lack of really doing a thorough investigation, all the characters that are involved with the commission that, had questionable and motivations too. I mean, Henry Kissinger was first put on there, which was hilarious, and then he resigned. He either resigned or I know they asked him if he'd had any business ties to any Bin Ladens, and then he resigned. And so, I mean, there's just so much to it. And again, even the fact that the president or vice president, neither of them were under oath. There is no transcript on their conversation.
You want to talk about the 9/11 Commission? I can talk about the 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission was run by Philip Zelikow, who was the executive director. He chose the witnesses. He chose what questions would be asked. Before the commission even started, he and Ernest May wrote a complete outline of the final 9/11 report before the investigation even started, and they kept that outline a secret from the staffers of the 9/11 Commission. And when the staffers found out about it, they used to joke about it. They would send little memos to each other, jokingly about it. He made sure that a lot of whistleblowers weren't spoken to. He rewrote the 9/11 report to be more favorable of Condoleezza Rice. He tried to insert a false link between Iraq and Al-Qaeda into the 9/11 report, but was rebuffed by the staffers and the families. He and Dieter Snell are the reasons why Saudi Arabia was let off the hook in the 9/11 report. They took part in a late-night editing session to remove Saudi support from the 9/11 report, and against the wishes of those who worked on that aspect of it, and they put it into footnotes in the back of the book.
Do you think that's what's in those 28 redacted pages at the Saudi connection?
Well, obviously, Bob Graham's been talking about that for years. What I think is in those pages, and this is just conjecture, is the name Bandar. And because Prince Bandar, who is also known as Bandar Bush, was a very close friend of the family, of the Bush family. He was the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States for years. He was essential in the Iran-Contra affair as far as getting rebels. he during just recently, within the last couple of years, he was responsible for getting terrorists to go into Syria. So he knows that network, how that network works. And I think that he might be mentioned in those pages, and obviously he has close affiliations with the Bush family, so that's an issue. And there were things that were released by the 9/11 Commission called MFRs, which were memorandums for the record, which were essentially descriptions of interviews given of different witnesses before the 9/11 Commission. And Bandar's is completely classified. We're not allowed to read it. So, there are so many. People talk about the 28 redacted pages. The 9/11 Commission has yet to release all of its documentation. Actually, it's the National Archives has yet to release all of their information. A lot of the information that has been released is greatly redacted. There's this incident being covered by the Broward Bulldog journalist Dan Christensen with regards to a Sarasota Saudi 9/11 connection. There are 80,000 documents being withheld by the FBI about that. So there's so much information that we just don't have access to. And again, how can you say you know the truth of 9/11 when you don't even have access to all of the documentation and so forth? Another thing I wanted to point out for people, there was a report compiled by 9/11 family members and Jersey girls, Lori Van Auken and Mindy Kleinberg. It was released in September 2006. It was a report that essentially showed how poorly the 9/11 Commission answered their questions. Press for Truth, the 9/11 Family Steering Committee website, History Commons, the report by Lori and Mindy. These are all credible things that you can be showing people to try and get them on board.
Yeah, Anthony Schaefer. I mean, his book was basically ripped up. I think they didn't. The FBI buy all the copies of his book. What was it?
The Pentagon did.
Yeah, the Pentagon did, and then just burned them or got rid of them, disposed of them.
I think they burned them. The Able Dangerous, another aspect of the cover-up. There are so many different cover-ups. NORAD lied. Okay, the 9/11 Commission, people on the 9/11 Commission considered referring NORAD to the Justice Department for a criminal investigation. But Zelikow saw to that it didn't happen, and instead it was referred to the DOD's Inspector General. And the Inspector General, for both NORAD and Able Danger, let everybody off the hook. And it was found out Frank Rich, I believe, and Catherine Herridge of Fox News, they both found out that the DOD IG then at the time was probably taking direction from above, from the White House and so forth. So we still don't know the truth about NORAD's response that day. Oh my God, there's so many things that we could talk about.
Yeah, I mean, and then even like some really suspicious things, like some of the obviously the what people have called inside trading before 9/11. Also, John Ashcroft, the FBI told him, like, I think as early as 6 weeks before September 11th not to take commercial airplanes. And that was, I think, even
CB he disputes that. But
who does?
He disputes that. I think he was questioning about that during the 9/11 Commission, and I think he says that he took a commercial flight between such and such a time. So that's not true. But I don't know.
I know CBS reported it, I believe.
One thing I do, and one thing I recommend for everybody, is to read debunker websites. Read to what they have to say, because it improves your own arguments. Because we're not right about everything. We're just not.
Well, yeah, my opinion has changed quite a bit, and I'm sure yours since the beginning has changed. I mean, let's get into that. Like, from your beginning of your research till now, what are some of the biggest changes of opinions? Like things that you thought, certain theories that you were all on board on, and now have changed a little bit. Like some people believe that a missile hit the Pentagon. Now some people believe that it was a plane. Some people believe that Building 7 was demolition or whatever. Or some people don't even believe that the hijackers made it on the plane because there's only one sketchy little picture of them. There's no yeah.
What I say to that, everybody says, show me a video of the hijackers going on board the plane, or going on board the planes. And I say, show me a video of the passengers of those planes going on the planes. They don't exist. So, I always thought that was funny, but go ahead.
But yeah, so those are just some examples of some theories that people might initially jump on board, and then as time goes by, changes. Do you have any theories that initially?
Well, the whole Norman Mineta incident. I've changed my views of that a lot over the years. I think David Ray Griffin originally said that whole incident was about a stand-down order, I believe. And I don't think I ever believed that. I thought it might have been something else. But there were pictures released recently that showed Dick Cheney sitting in his office with his feet up on his desk and his hands folded. You could have put a cat in his lap and he would have looked like the Don from The Godfather. But he was watching Bush give his press conference at Booker T Elementary, so he couldn't have been down in the POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, when Norman Mineta said he was. So Norman Mineta may have been mistaken. And, I started to think, what a situation that was that day, that George W. Bush's communications equipment, which is the most advanced in the world, was having problems that day. Donald Rumsfeld was missing that day. He was outside, helping carry people to the ambulances or whatever the hell he was doing. That's part of where he was missing. And that gave an opportunity for Dick Cheney to take charge. Now, Dick Cheney, I don't know if you're aware, but the powers of the vice president are to break a tie in the Senate and to take over as president in the event the president is killed or is in surgery. So Cheney, who was not part of the military chain of command at all, was in charge that morning. And there were reports that fighter pilots were ignoring his orders simply because of the fact that he was not part of the military chain of command. So that's kind of weird to me, that he was put into that situation that enabled, helped to enable the success of the attacks. I don't know.
Yeah, that whole Mineta thing's kind of, it's weird because it really, I still don't know what to make of it. I know that the Secret Service knew that there was some plane coming at, high speeds towards the White House or in that direction, like 30 minutes before it hit. I know they have ground-to-air missiles, that they could have used. So, I mean, the fact that didn't shoot it down when something was coming that quickly, and,
even that's disputed, the idea that they had ground-to-air missiles. You would think, the military headquarters of the United States would have some form of security.
Absolutely.
But when you look into it, there's actually nothing concrete that says that they did have missiles or whatever that day. So,
but isn't it possible that some, that type of information could also, they could want it to be secretive, because obviously that's.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
We don't. But I'm just saying, based on all available information out there, and I was a friend of John Judge, or am a friend. He passed away. He was somebody who said that they did have surface-to-air missiles at the Pentagon. So I believed that for a lot of years. But when I looked to try and find proof of it, I couldn't. So, again, you change your views over the years a lot, and I don't know. I mean, I look at 9/11 as a crime and not an act of war. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And with 9/11, there are people within our government and other governments, elements within other governments, have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11. You had the Bush administration coming into office, the very first meeting with his principals, the topic A of discussion was finding a way to go into Iraq. This is according to Paul O'Neill, who was the former Treasury Secretary, said that the president was saying, go find me a way to go into Iraq. And then, Dick Cheney, with his energy task force, was meeting with every oil executive in existence, even though they denied it before Congress, talking about Iraq's oil fields months before 9/11. Richard Clarke, during an interview in 2007, said that members of the Bush administration were discussing creating a casus belli to go to war with Iraq. For those who don't know, a casus belli is just a cause for war. So these are all very suspicious things. I joke sometimes, there's those, if you see something, say something. Okay, well, I see all this bullshit about 9/11 going on. Who am I supposed to call?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then Rumsfeld losing trillions of dollars the day before 9/11 and announcing that.
Even that's disputed. If you look into it, a few months after Rumsfeld said that 2.3 million was trillion dollars was missing, they changed that number to 700 billion or something. And so again, I point these things out for people so maybe they'll think twice about using that information, because they don't want a debunker to come by and say blah blah blah, you're discredited. So again,
and that's a good point, because I think certain topics, it's fine for you and I to talk about because and bounce ideas off each other, because we're both open-minded and we're not going to try to, our purpose isn't trying to discredit one another. But when you're talking to somebody who is, their first reaction is to not believe you and discredit you, what would you consider the strongest pieces of evidence or the topics that you should bring up?
You can mention the family's fight. Again, you can point to the press releases from the Jersey Girls over the years. You can point to everything that the Bush administration did to make sure that a real investigation never transpired. You could look at the 9/11 Commission. My God, they had, you know what a government minder is?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, basically during the 9/11 Commission, there were witnesses who would testify who were accompanied by what were called government minders. They were essentially people from their agency to sit there with them. And the families and some of the 9/11 commissioners were complaining that they were intimidating witnesses, that they were answering questions for witnesses. And the family members, again, released 3 press releases saying that they don't want any government minders to be there during the 9/11 Commission. And they were ignored. Think about what I said. Intimidating witnesses. That, to me, blows the 9/11 Commission's credibility out of the water. That one little thing, just blows it out of the water completely. And, I don't know, what would you show people? 9/11 Press for Truth, maybe? Maybe show them the timeline again. I don't know, but the families have always been important because it's a very emotional topic, 9/11. And I think sometimes in order to get people involved, you have to touch on their heartstrings a little bit and remind them, show them, the family members, what they've been trying to do. I think that's helpful. Because, again, if you're a moral person, how can you turn your backs on these people? I haven't been able to do it.
And I think it being emotional is probably, I think in some cases it's what influences us and is our motivation to continue these conversations. But I also think it's why certain people have a hard time believing that they could be lied to about those events, because to think that, and you talked about the families, and that's what we think about them, but so do the people who do believe the official story. They also think about the families and think about all the lives that were lost.
Can you imagine if any of the things that the Jersey Girls have done have gotten any of the attention that like Britney Spears has gotten, where we would be today. It just it infuriates me how our corporate news is so controlled.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge issue too, because that's the whole purpose of reporters and journalists. And I mean, even though they're kind of a dying breed in mainstream media, but that's the purpose, is to question government. And I mean, the fact that questioning government is looked like a bad thing, or now, like you said, and this kind of unfortunately goes back to the Alex Jones thing. Anytime you question government, you're lumped in with those conspiracy theorists who also talk about chemtrails and reptilians and stuff like that. And so I just think that you can be. And that's the thing too. It's like it's even when there were the whole support the troops thing when we're going into Iraq and Afghanistan. It was like anybody who's anti-war, they were also grouping them in with being anti-troops, which was just fucking insanity to me. Because I'm like, the most pro military and troops you can be would be somebody who's anti-war, because what you're saying is nobody's lives should be on the line unless it's absolutely last resort. And that's, the fact that people who were basically for the Iraq war were the same people who believed that showed some type of them being patriotic. It was insane to me, because I just think that, look at all these people who went to Afghanistan, went to Iraq, came back, have PTSD, lost limbs, will never be the same again. But yet all our government says is, oops, my bad, I guess they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. Like, yeah, these politicians going to move on, but these people are never going to be the same ever if they're alive, and their families are never going to be the same, and they have to live with this.
Well, that's why accountability is so damn important. There's been no accountability in government. People say that the Bush administration was incompetent. I disagree. The Bush administration wanted to go to war. They went to war. They wanted to make billions for their corporate friends. They made billions for their corporate friends. They wanted to expand executive power. They managed to expand executive power. They committed crime after crime after crime during their time in office and remained essentially Teflon coated throughout. To me, they were anything but incompetent. But there needs to be accountability in D.C. If there isn't, then we're going to have a runaway government like we have right now. When you have accountability, when you hold people accountable, the purpose of it is so that the next person might not do what the first person did, because that person was held accountable. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that in the United States government.
Yeah, and we keep making the same mistake. I feel like our government capitalizes on the fact that we have awful long-term memory. The fact that you look what happened to Iraq, you look what happened to Libya, taking down somebody that we thought was bad, even though we do business with people who we know are bad, like the Saudis. And yet, and then the country becomes even worse. We're doing the same thing in Syria and trying to sell the same ideas about Syria. And it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Like, it's, during Iraq, I mean, I say Iraq is our Vietnam, and it's similar idea. We can all agree now it was a giant fuck up and we should have never got involved. And Syria might be the next one, and I just think it gets to a point in time where people have to realize that they're just basically making the same mistakes on purpose over and over again. And
Gore Vidal called it the United States of Amnesia.
Yeah, great documentary too. I think it's still on Netflix. He has a documentary named the same thing, the United States Amnesia, and it's absolutely true. What he says is absolutely true. But I think a little bit is the fact that people are so busy and people have their own lives. They go to work, they take care of their kids. They don't have time to really look into these issues and look into and research and really find out what's going on. So, like,
also the corporate news, they'll report on something, but there'll be no follow-up. And then there'll be the next thing that comes along, and the next thing that comes along, and the next thing that comes along. And by the time, you get to this point, you've already forgotten that this other thing has happened. That's a big problem, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why you need alternative sources, and that's a nice thing about podcasting and YouTube, and the fact that a average person like myself can do my best to kind of spark these conversations and kind of provoke these conversations without any censorship, without any advertising, without anybody telling me what I can and cannot talk about and censoring me. And I think that's why a lot of younger people are completely just lost any interest in what's on TV and really go to the web for almost all their entertainment and news, or Twitter, or Twitter, Facebook. I mean, a lot of people get their news from there, which obviously there's always a scare of, is that being controlled, or are they being influenced by government, or what ties they have with government, on what we're seeing or what we're not seeing. Are they blocking people? Are they shutting people down for saying unpopular things? I mean, that could be the future too, and we don't know what's going on with that. But I think that as long as we have this anarchist type of world, we call the internet, where any average person can start their own blog and start their own website, their own YouTube channel, I think we do have the advantage of being able to spark these conversations. And honestly, I think most of the people who watch mainstream media are people who are a little older, who grew up watching it and really, at the end of the day, put it on for a couple minutes before they go to bed. And unfortunately, that's their piece of news they get for the day. They don't research it. They don't have time to look into it. Whatever that news station tells them, that's what they're going to believe. And I think that, just look at like Phil Donahue when he was anti the Iraq War, when he worked for MSNBC, which is what most people will consider, and I agree, is a liberal station. But it's funny because he had this liberal idea of being anti a war, and he gets, the highest rated show gets taken off TV. So, and you look at the Young Turks, Cenk from the Young Turks, his issues with being outspoken on mainstream media. So it just, even though we pretend there's this conservative and liberal and mainstream media, at the end of the day, if you are speaking out against big pharma or the military industrial complex, they're going to censor you. And ideology goes out the door. They don't care. I mean, it's like that old movie Network, when there's no such thing as ideology. There's only DuPont, and there's only these corporations. And you look at how many different religious people and different political people, they'll do business together if it's in their interest, and it doesn't matter if you're Saudi and you have Sharia law and you're a Christian US president. You'll do business together, So it just, I think this whole idea of I think a lot of these ideologies and a lot of these things that we fight about and we think are important, all it does is it does a great job of distracting us and keeping us arguing and debating amongst ourselves, and it gets our focus off the big picture, that is the fact that it's about our foreign policy is dictated by keeping an empire and having control of the world, and from NATO expanding east, to just control. I mean, we don't get involved in countries that don't have natural resources we want. We don't. It's quite obvious. So, and we have a history of doing this.
Well, our military, should be used for defensive purposes only. If somebody wants to come into this country, then we activate our military. But our military should not be all over the world, making sure that America's hegemony is intact, or expanding business interests and whatnot. It should not be used for that, obviously, but that's what it's used for. And whenever you dissent, you talk about freedom of speech. Try dissenting against your government and watch what happens. You'll be attacked in unison by the corporate news. They won't even let you on the news to give your point of view. They'll just attack you or lump you in with a group of other people. I was thinking back in the day, Dr. Martin Luther King gave an interview, I think it was on the Mike Douglas show, where he was giving his points of view about the Iraq or the Vietnam War, and so on and so forth. Because at the end of his life, he was very anti-war, and you couldn't see that today. You couldn't see Cindy Sheehan on like a show like Ellen talking about her views of the Iraq War, or my views on 9/11. They would go after the crazy people. You know, if it becomes an issue, then they go after the crazies and they paint everybody as the same thing and they discredit you that way. But we've already talked about that.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I think there's a huge issue with the fact that there really isn't any debate. I mean, the only thing that fills up our news is nonsense about, you know, a conservative bashing the Republican, bashing the liberals, and the liberals bashing the conservatives, and it's not about real issues. I mean, a lot of the real issues have nothing to do with these ideologies. I mean, what's going on in Syria, like, the American public should know what's going on in Syria. They should know the fact that we're funneling weapons to ISIS, and we're also trying to take down Assad, which makes zero sense because Assad is fighting ISIS and ISIS is fighting Assad. And the fact that the Turks are buying oil from them, from ISIS, you know, so where is ISIS getting their money? And like all these things that are actually important, and it's important because if people knew what was really going on, and the fact that we're getting involved in Ukraine and what's going on politically there, what's going on in Egypt, we're getting involved in all these other governments, and what, you know, they should have a democracy and let the people decide their own politics, and we're trying to influence everything that. You know, if we knew this stuff, people would be our age. That people like you and I, who, you know, are living paycheck to paycheck. Well, maybe not, but you know what I mean. Like, most people are living paycheck to paycheck, and most people don't have much saved up. I mean, I don't save shit. I mean, we just don't. People aren't stable enough to really save anything, and yet we're spending billions and millions overseas bombing people that most of us don't know or even know why. We're spending millions on influencing political movements in different countries. All this stuff just recklessly. But our roads suck. Our airports suck. You know, our schools suck. There's so much that sucks that could use a little bit of extra love and support, and yet we're just recklessly spending overseas. And it's like, these conversations need to be talked about, because I think the public, and I think most people will be like, you know what, yeah, I know, but I think when you actually look at the numbers and you look at what's really going on, I think people would be so upset that maybe they'd be a little bit more outspoken.
One thing I've tried to do over the years, I've tried to get people like Noam Chomsky, Glenn Greenwald, Amy Goodman, Chris Hedges, to talk about the lies of 9/11, and I've been unsuccessful. And when the news doesn't work, it's up to those people with a voice to inform the public of what's going on. And it becomes their responsibility. And I think it's shameful when they refuse to do so, you know, because they're afraid of being painted with the 9/11 truth brush, or losing their pulpits, or losing their paychecks, or whatever. You know, that has to be the reasons why some of these people refuse to touch the subject, in my mind. And I think that's very selfish. You know, I wish I had a voice that reached people like Glenn Greenwald. You know, there might be differences in the world today about 9/11 anyway. I don't know. But again, it's their responsibility. Oops, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, Noam Chomsky, it's crazy because, you know, he talks about, you know, obviously his work with manufacturing consent, and talking about Edward Bernays and propaganda and all these things. But and then 9/11's the thing, like the one topic that he won't even touch. But yet he'll talk about American empire and all these other things that all really, it only backs the idea and the motives on why they would let something like that happen. I mean, all these things kind of influence one another, and yet that's the one topic. And I think you nailed it right on the head. I think it has something to do with the fact, and I hate picking on Alex Jones this whole episode, but I think what ends up happening, if you talk about 9/11, you get lumped in with those people. And I think that these guys do care about their credibility, they do care about their reputation, and they do have, when they speak, people do listen, and they're maybe afraid that if they get lumped in with those people, then maybe people won't listen, maybe they won't have as much credibility.
Here's a guarantee I have for those people, that if they started speaking out about the lies of 9/11, their popularity amongst the people would soar tremendously. You know, and yes, they would get harassed by the idiots saying, well, why aren't you covering this theory? Or why aren't you covering that? But so what? It's still the right thing to do. And you talked about how this isn't an ideological thing. There are things that are happening in this country right now that have absolutely nothing to do with left or right. Lying to us about 9/11 is wrong. Lying us into war is wrong. Torture is wrong. Indefinite detention is wrong. This isn't a left or right issue. It's a right and wrong issue. And there are things going on that are just wrong. And fighting for advocacy or fighting for truth, accountability, and justice for the 9/11 attacks is the right thing to do. In what world does it make sense not to seek truth, justice, and accountability for the murder of 2,976 people, especially considering the fact that we were lied to about that day, and especially considering what that day has been used for? In what world does that make sense? Not in any world that I want to be a part of. Unfortunately, I am, but whatever. In what world does it make sense to attack and slander and misrepresent those seeking truth, accountability, and justice, considering we were lied to and considering what that day has been used for? That's all the media has done with us. They haven't given us our fair shake or for fair say. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be easy. You would think it'd be easy to spark more interest in these journalists and writers and thinkers to spark these conversations, because every year on the anniversary, the TV's full of specials on what happened, and you can tell, like, you watching those specials with people, it's still, gives people chills, and it still seems unbelievable. Watching people jump out of a building, hearing first responders talk about hearing, just the bodies hitting the roads, and that's fucking crazy. And to think that, this isn't a topic that we should be looking into, and we shouldn't be asking questions about, and we shouldn't be wondering how the fuck can something like this happen in a country that spends so much on military and defense. It's insane. People should be asking these questions, and I think that you look at how much it still affects people, and I think, like I said before, I think in some way that emotional connection to the events is probably why. It's no different than telling somebody who loves their girlfriend so much, if you tell them that, hey, your girlfriend's cheating on you, your first reaction is, no, she's not, because you just can't believe it. Somebody just turned your whole world upside down, and that's what happens with 9/11. You're so emotionally involved, and you see this horror that you can't even begin to believe that somebody would ever let something like this happen or cover it up. So I think that's the huge obstacle that we have to get through to get people to, people from the outside looking in to really start questioning it and get everybody on board that, what, let's all agree we don't necessarily know exactly what happened, but we can all agree there's somebody definitely fucked up. There should be people who are accountable for this. And the investigation was bullshit, and we should have a real investigation and really look into this. And the families and the first responders never got any justice for this. And they talked about they spend more money on investigating Bill Clinton and Monica than they did on 9/11. That's insanity. So yeah, I think even myself talking about it still kind of works me up a little bit, because I think that just hearing those things, and especially, I'm sure much like yourself, like when I first got into researching it, I just, story after story would just, I'd break down, just like be like, oh my God. I couldn't even believe that this happened. It still seemed unreal, and it was like losing a loved one, and luckily I was very lucky I didn't lose any loved ones on 9/11, but it's similar to losing a loved one in your family, and then you just, for a long time, you still can't even believe they're gone. That's kind of how 9/11 feels. It's like you still can't, it's so unreal that you still have a hard time believing, even though I've seen 1,000 videos of it. Every time I see those planes go into that building, I still feel like this can't be real. Like, I'm gonna wake up and that was just some movie I watched, and I'm daydreaming. It seems so insane. And but I think because it was such a crazy event, that's what motivates people like yourself and I to still talk about it years later. And Even on your Facebook, I know sometimes you'll write something that has nothing to do with 9/11 and end it with a little 9/11 line, which is I find myself laughing. I'm like, I don't know if it's meant to be a joke, but it's kind of funny because you're sparking conversation and being funny while doing it.
One thing I've done for a little while now is that I start my mornings by saying, "Good morning. We were lied to about 9/11. Have a nice day." Or, like you said, like yesterday, I think I said that it looks like Hillary's going to take Arizona and Bernie's going to take Idaho and Utah, and we were lied to. And in other news, we were fucking lied to about 9/11. Have a nice night, stuff like that. But to me, that's the truth. I hate the phrase 9/11 was an inside job. I can't stand that phrase. But to say that we were lied to about 9/11. That's the God's honest truth. We were about a multitude of things. You talked about the put options, the insider trading. There were 3 studies done that showed that in all likelihood there was insider trading that were outside the 9/11 Commission. These studies, and I think James Ricard, is that his name? He recently came out with a book. I think it was called The Death of the Dollar, maybe, I don't know, or Death of Money, where he said that there was insider trading, and he had CIA contacts and so forth.
Have you watched 9/11 Follow the Money by James Corbett?
No, I didn't. But with regards to James Ricard, I think he says that it was Al-Qaeda that was doing the trading and not anybody nefarious within our government or outside our government. But if Al-Qaeda was doing insider trading on 9/11, our government would have been all over that. Instead, they said that there was no insider trading at all. You're all full of crap, and that's the end of it.
Well, didn't the commission report? I think they did refer to the inside trading a little bit, but they said that there was something that was. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to get the exact wording, but it was. They were basically getting to the point that there was. It looked like there was some suspicious things happening, but because the people that were linked to those suspicious things weren't linked to Al-Qaeda, so they didn't investigate it.
They said it was innocuous, I think was the term. The 9/11 Commission addressed it in a monograph, but again, it just didn't. They addressed one instance. There were so many instances throughout the world of trading going on before 9/11, on 9/11, whatever happened. So I don't trust what they have to say at all. I don't trust the 9/11 Commission at all. The only thing the 9/11 Commission is good for is, to get possible statements that conflict with what people have said. And we've done that to a certain extent. We've shown that certain statements in the 9/11 Commission report are conflicted or different than what actually happened. I think Bush said that in the 9/11 report, I think it says that Bush said that if he was aware or made aware that there were terrorist cells in the United States, that he would have moved to take care of it. Well, Kurt Eichenwald wrote an article in 2011. He got to read through some of the presidential daily briefings that came prior to the August 6th PDB, and they actually talked about terrorist cells in the United States. And Bush used to say, if I had any inkling whatsoever that this was going to transpire, I would have moved heaven and earth. And he said that talking point on several occasions. So that's all the 9/11 report is good for, is to just maybe find contradictions or possible information we weren't aware of. But I don't trust it as an end result.
Yeah, and there's so much information that's missing from it. I know, like the firefighters, all their interviews are withheld.
Whistleblowers, my God, there were so many whistleblowers.
Sibel, Richard Grove, Thomas Drake, yeah, who I should be on my show hopefully soon, and there's so many people that basically.
Thomas Drake was on my show, and he confirmed for me that the NSA lied. The NSA, there were 2 hijackers in San Diego who were making phone calls to a hub in Yemen, an Al-Qaeda hub in Yemen, And the NSA said that they could not identify where the calls were coming from. They could only identify where the calls were going to, which means that they had no idea they were coming from San Diego. But Thomas Drake said that they did know exactly where they were coming from, and where they were going to. So they knew that these people were in the United States. They didn't bother telling the FBI. So they lied. And the NSA was barely investigated by the 9/11 Commission. In fact, they stayed away from it. Philip Zelikow, I think, said that the CIA was sexier by comparison. So there's so much about the NSA that we don't know. Another thing Thomas Drake told me was that Dick Cheney had a back channel to the different intelligence agencies prior to 9/11. So who the hell knows what he knew about what was going on? So, I mean, there's so many people that were not talked to by the 9/11 Commission. And they promised the family members that each and every whistleblower would be heard. And barely any of them were. They had to force Sibel Edmonds into a family meeting with the commission to get them to talk to her. Not force Sibel, but get her into a meeting between them and the commissioners, and just to get them to talk to her.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And that's why when people say, oh, if there was a cover up, then why hasn't anybody spoken out? And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Plenty of people have spoken out. It's people would say the same thing about the JFK assassination. Oh, if there was a cover up, it's like it doesn't take a whole lot of research to just find all the inconsistencies, and there's a whole lot of them. And like you said, everything from Thomas Drake to Sibel Edmonds. I mean, there's just so many people that were involved. And we already talked about Anthony Schaefer. I mean, there's just so many people who were involved who talked about, how they had foreknowledge, how they could have, and again, so let's get to I get not to, I guess, put you on the spot, but what do you think happened? Do you think that they had foreknowledge and they ignored it? Do you think they let it happen? Do you think what do you think? What's your opinion on that?
Everybody has theories. It's human nature to have theories. First of all, that's an important point. It's human nature to have theories about things you're not being given answers to. Theories as to why they're not giving you the answers. So it's not crazy to theorize.
Yeah.
But theories are not facts, and that's another important point that people need to understand.
But that is a very important point, because without information, if we don't have enough information, of course people are going to connect their own dots, because we have a lack of information. That's, like you said, that's human nature.
Right. So if I were to say, what do I think happened on 9/11, I haven't created a narrative in my mind that makes sense based on everything that I know. I can't give you an honest answer. I think that they were well aware that the attacks were coming. I think it's possible they took steps to ensure the success of the attacks. I think, that's one thing. We talk about the warnings. And people used to say, oh, that's such lie hop. And for people who don't know, lie hop means let it happen on purpose. And the other one is my hop, which is made it happen on purpose, which were two of the most divisive terms ever introduced to the 9/11 truth movement. They were essentially the false left-right paradigm of the 9/11 truth movement. People used to call people, oh, you dirty lie hopper, and so forth. But with regards to the warnings, with all that information, isn't it possible that they took steps to ensure the success of the attacks, knowing that they were coming? I mean, the warnings were important. I don't know, maybe, I talked about Dick Cheney being put in charge without being part of the military chain of command. That further confused people that day. There was confusion that day caused by military exercises, among other things. I don't know what happened. I know that the Bush administration wanted to go to war. I know that they lied about 9/11. I know that they made sure that a real investigation never transpired into the attacks. If I was going to name a suspect for 9/11, people within the Bush administration would certainly qualify. But I don't know for sure what happened that day. I wish I did. I wish I fucking did know. I wouldn't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's one thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about people who who are 9/11 researchers, and they're so confident about their theories, and they're so confident that they have the answer, and other researchers are wrong. Because I'm just like, we can't. None of us know for sure. There's no way of us knowing 100% for sure about a lot of the events that happened that day. So, like you said, we can all have theories, and one thing that we can all agree on is that there's a lot of inconsistencies. And but
there's a quote from Thomas Pynchon, I think is his last name. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they never have to worry about the answers. So, there are a lot of people asking the wrong questions out there. And that's because of some of the people like Alex Jones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. and there's another quote. It's easier to be tricked than convince somebody. It's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And I think there's a lot of people who've been tricked into believing the official story, and then it's much harder to convince them that the official story is bullshit, and and that they've been lied to. And yeah, I think that's, those are all huge issues. I think Press for Truth is definitely my go-to documentary when I'm trying to get somebody into the topic. It's just a great film that, like I said, has nothing to do with conspiracy theories. And hopefully it takes people down a rabbit hole that they do their own research, and they really, and again, we can all do all the research in the world. You've done probably more than anybody on this topic, but
there are some that have done more, believe me.
Oh, I'm sure, but you're definitely up there, and with that said, even yourself, you're not 100% confident on what exactly took place, and I think that's a very noble thing. I think that we have this huge issue in American culture that nobody ever wants to be wrong, so it's like if God forbid somebody said something and they're wrong, so it's like nobody ever wants to admit they're wrong. Nobody ever wants to admit they might not know something, because if they do, then they come off as dumb. And it's like, well, is our purpose to try to be right, or is our purpose to try to get justice? And I always look at it as our purpose is trying to get justice. And if that's
this isn't a popularity contest either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I say a lot of things that a lot of people in the mainstream 9/11 truth movement don't like. I say that controlled demolition should not be front and center for everything. You're bottlenecking our message into something that's hard to believe for many people. And that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. And a lot of people don't like me for saying things like that.
I think the reason why that's one of the go-to ones is because in seconds you can show somebody a video, and you can be like, well, we can at least agree that it doesn't seem like this makes sense. And
I'll admit that the BTC-7 looks like a controlled demolition to a layman who doesn't know anything about buildings, who doesn't know anything about controlled demolition. It looks like it, but I'm not an expert. And that's another thing. You shouldn't have to be a scientist, an architect, an engineer to understand the need for 9/11 justice. It should be simple. And that's my one thing I want to say to people, is to try and keep it simple. As much as possible as you possibly can. And try to make the best message, create the best message that reaches the most people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the point that you keep making, and it's so important, focus on the things that we know for sure. Focus on the things that, we're sure we've been lied to. And that's the message that you keep putting out there, because that's the only thing we're sure of, is the fact that without a doubt we've been lied to. And that's the I guess the message we should all be working on. And again, like you said, the demolition thing, if you start off with the demolition conversation, maybe some people, you might get somebody to be like, you know what, maybe that doesn't make sense, and maybe it turns somebody into a 9/11 researcher, and they find out all these other things, and they become activists. But in a lot of cases, it also turns people off, because it's like, oh, really? This is what you're going to open up the conversation with? Like this is a demolition, so.
Let me qualify my statement. There's nothing wrong with questioning how those buildings came down. When they first came down, a lot of people were questioning how they came down, including family members. And there are still family members today that question how those buildings came down. As long as it's an important question to them, it's an important question to me. But again, front and center, it should not be, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I just think, again, all those things are, all you can do is have a theory, but the other things, like the fact that they had knowledge of the attacks beforehand, the fact that they covered it up, I mean, these aren't theories, these are things that actually happened, and which I think will get you much further in a conversation, which more than likely will probably turn into a debate. And so I think you'll go much further with those things, because those aren't about conspiracy theories. Those aren't about, and these are things that anybody can look into themselves and find this information and see that even the families, even people who were involved in the commission said that they messed up. And I forget his name, who apologized to the families.
Richard Clark.
Yeah, Richard Clark, who apologized to the families, and I think that alone tells you something about how he felt about the commission report and what they accomplished, or the lack of what they accomplished.
Well, he wasn't on the 9/11 commission. He was the counterterrorism czar under Clinton. Then he was demoted when Bush came into office by Philip Zelikow. Philip Zelikow should not have been anywhere near the 9/11 Commission. That also goes for Lee Hamilton, who has a history of covering things up, like the Iran-Contra affair, like the October surprise. He was good friends with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. He should not have been anywhere near the 9/11 Commission. The families wanted experts. They didn't want people on the Beltway to be to be the commissioners. And unfortunately, they got the Beltway. Who have their allegiances to other entities or people and so forth.
So being in this whole movement and being an activist and stuff like that, what do you think the future holds for the events on 9/11 and the investigation? And do you think that we'll ever get to a point where they'll maybe reinvestigate it, that maybe we can spark enough conversation where somebody like a Noam Chomsky or somebody else who has very popular, who could maybe spark these conversations and maybe force investigation?
I don't know what the future holds. What I do know is that it is absolutely essential to find out what happened that day and who was ultimately responsible. They say winners write the history and so forth. We can't afford to allow them to be the winners in this case, because otherwise they'll be continued to be used horribly throughout history. And we just got to stop it. But it's so important. I can't emphasize enough how important this topic still is to this day. And I'm afraid of students going to school and being taught things about 9/11 that simply aren't the truth, and then going through life thinking that was the truth. I've often contacted teachers that I know that have been writing syllabuses or syllabi to try and get them to cover certain issues in the classroom. I haven't been very successful, but that's one of the things I've been trying to do. Anyway, I think we're going to end on that.
Yeah.
If that's okay with you. But I want my last thing to people is, again, keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. Remember the families. The 9/11 Commission was absolutely corrupt and compromised. We deserve better for the murder of 2,976 people. And there needs to be real truth, accountability, and justice. Just keep it simple. We were lied to about 9/11.
Absolutely. And we didn't even get into the whole anthrax thing, which is another big part,
Yeah.
There's just so many rabbit holes, and there's so much to it, so many layers. But yeah, I think what you said about history is very important, because I think the unfortunate thing is when history happens, there's a lot of black, white, and a lot of gray area. But as time goes by, the events turn into black and white. There's good guys, there's bad guys, and that was it. And I think that's what we're trying to prevent from happening with the 9/11 incident, is that hopefully it's not. It doesn't turn into one of those things where it's just black and white, and we had bad guys, we had good guys, and that was the end of that story. And hopefully we keep sparking these conversations. So thank you so much for your work, John. You've done an amazing job keeping up with this conversation and being an activist and doing your part in sparking these conversations. And much like yourself, I also believe this is a topic that we can't let die, and we can't you know, for myself, it was a topic that really got me into a lot of questioning a lot of other things, and so it was really important. And you know, so we'll all do our best and then trying to keep this conversation going, and hopefully at some point get some justice to some extent. And until that's done, I don't think people like yourself or I are ever going to stop talking about it. And hopefully we can get people on board and away from the InfoWars. and listen to more credible, you know, conversations and debates, you know, and that's always the goal. So that's what I'm trying to do here, and I know that's what you did with your show. You had your podcast, which people can still find on iTunes and YouTube and stuff like that, and I'll put links to it in the show notes, and check it out. He had conversations with Colleen.
Also read my book. It's called 9/11 Truther: The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. And I chose the title knowing that it would, you know, everybody would hate it, but I thought it was a controversial enough title that maybe it would get attention, because I was the one who coined the phrase, so it made sense to me. Maybe I should not have called it that, but that's the very first thing in the book that I address is the term 9/11 Truther and what it actually means, as opposed to what the corporate media has made it to mean. You know, I wrote a definition for it years ago for what a 9/11 truther is, and it's nothing like what the corporate news would lead you to believe. So don't judge a book by its cover or its title.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's crazy that looking for truth has become a bad thing. Being called somebody who's looking for truth. I mean, that title, to me, what it should mean to the average person before, like you said, mainstream media completely changed what it should mean. But if an alien came to this planet and had no knowledge of any information, and you just said 9/11 truther, I mean, they would think, oh, it sounds like somebody who is looking for the truth about 9/11. That's all it should mean, you know? So unfortunately, it got manipulated into a bunch of other things. But yeah, I mean, it's sad that word has become something that we're almost afraid of at times.
Yep.
To be labeled as one of those. But thank you again, John. I really appreciate it. I'll keep up with your stuff. Do you have any upcoming projects? Any places you're going to be at or anything?
Not at the moment. No. Well, I broke my back 3 years ago. So.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I've been homebound a lot. Pretty much. Otherwise, I'd be chaining myself to the White House as often as possible. That's another thing I think that people need to do is start, you know, getting beyond the internet and getting out on the streets and committing acts of civil disobedience. Do you think elements within our government were complicit in the attacks, or don't you? Is that an important enough reason to commit civil disobedience? I think so. I did. So I think other people should consider that as well. Oh. And keep it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, John. We'll keep updated and feel better. Sorry to hear about your back. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I know back pain can be really bad. My mother had a couple back surgeries, and you know, unfortunately, those are the lingering things that never go away, and it completely stops you from being able to do anything. So,
right.
But thanks a lot, John. Feel better and keep up the good work. I really appreciate all the hours and blood, sweat, and tears you poured into this topic.
Thank you very much, Ricky, and have a good day.
Hey, you too. Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
I believe in the ripple effect.